Hello everybody, thank you for tuning in and giving this a listen today as I talk about college football conference realignment and a potential expansion of the college football playoff. The next round of college football expansion will probably start happening around 2025, 2026, because between 2023 and 2025, you have the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Pac-12's TV deals all expire. So this is when conferences will look to expand so that they can add more teams and add more value to their TV contracts. And in the end, college football is all about money, so these conferences will likely expand. Also, the college football playoff contract ends in 2026. Around that time, we should expect the college football playoff to expand so that it can bring in more teams and make more money. So right now we have the Power 5 conferences being the Big Ten, ACC, Pac-12, Big 12, and SEC. And we also have the Group of 5 conferences with the American, Sun Belt, Mountain West, MAC, and Conference USA. For the purpose of this video, I'm just going to be focusing on the Power 5 conferences and how they will expand. And that will cause the Group of 5 conferences to eventually change, but I'm not too well versed on the members in all those conferences, so I'll just focus on the main ones right now. Jumping right into it, let's start with the Big Ten. They currently have 14 teams. I think they'll be looking to add 2 more teams to get up to 16 when their TV deal ends in 2023. Right now, they are also currently the most profitable conference as reported by 2018 year's numbers. So I believe that they will look at adding Missouri as number 1, take them from the SEC conference, and Virginia from the ACC. Now I know a lot of people are going to say Missouri would never leave the SEC conference, the better football conference. They're also the second most profitable. But if you look at it, Missouri back in 2010, 2011, whenever Nebraska joined the Big Ten, and the Big 12 was kind of falling apart, Missouri wanted to get an invite from the Big Ten, but they ultimately expanded out to Nebraska, causing Missouri to go to the SEC. Now, Missouri is an AAU school, which the Big Ten really looks at for all of its members. All of its members are currently in the AAU or have formerly been in it with Nebraska. When they were accepted, they were a part of it. So this fit, it also works geographically with Missouri being right there in Big Ten country, right on the border in the Midwest. And so, yeah, it just kind of makes sense there. It's also, they have been kind of dominated the last few years in the SEC. I know they started off hot, winning the SEC East 2 or 3 years in a row. But I think moving them into the Big Ten will make them more competitive and also add another footprint for the Big Ten to expand in. They currently don't have any teams that far south, and this will give them a new market in St. Louis. Now, as for Virginia, they are also in the AAU, and the Big Ten does not have a team in Virginia. So again, this would give them another footprint in another state, allowing their TV contract to be more lucrative, get more money from it. Now, Virginia, they have been in the ACC for a while, and it would be tough to see them leave that conference as it is a very basketball-heavy conference, with Virginia just winning the 2019 NCAA tournament. It would definitely hurt them, but Virginia is a very good academic school. It also would jump ship to go to the Big Ten because it is, again, the most profitable conference, and it's all about money. So I could see Virginia leaving to where they can get more money from the Big Ten and also be in a conference that is pretty stable with a lot of big name teams. The ACC, on the other hand, a lot of people have said that, they are kind of a weaker conference, and that's showing in these college football playoff rankings, and also allowing teams, Clemson's potentially getting screwed this season, being ranked lower. So if they can go to a stronger conference and have a chance to compete there, then, they have a chance of it making even more money. Looking at the overall picture of the Big Ten right now, so you have these 16 teams, and one concern right now is that it is very top heavy, I guess, with the teams on the East division in the Big Ten being a lot stronger because you have Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State all in that one conference. So I think they will look at realigning it somehow. Quickly drew it up, and I could put it into a North and South division, and I think this looks very good. It's balanced, and it adds for more exciting matchups where you can still keep protected rivalries in there and also add for a conference championship that has two really good teams instead of Ohio State playing a Northwestern in the championship again, and that hurting the Big Ten's chances of making it into the college football playoff. All right, moving on down the list, we'll go to the SEC. They currently have 14 teams, but in my scenario where Missouri leaves to go to the Big Ten, they'd be down to 13. I think they'll be looking at adding 3 more teams at that point to get up to the 16 that the Big Ten also has. It's of note that their TV contracts run into the mid-2030s. So how a team would join that, it would probably have to reshape their TV contract deal around that time in the mid-2020s when everything is happening. So I think the first team that they will look to add will be Virginia Tech from the ACC. Yes, it's not traditionally in SEC country as it is farther north, but as compared to their academics with the rest of the ACC, they are a little bit lower and on par with a lot of the SEC schools there. This would allow the SEC to expand up into Virginia and give them another market of profitability. Again, will help their TV contracts expand. Looking at some other teams that could join, I think you could have Oklahoma and then Oklahoma State come over from the Big 12. This would put the conference at that 16 teams. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be saying Oklahoma and Oklahoma State would never leave, but I believe they will because the SEC is a lot more profitable than the Big 12. Plus, in theory, the Big 12, I believe, will eventually fold. But when Oklahoma leaves the Big 12, they're going to bring along Oklahoma State with them. It's a lot of pressures from politicians and in-state funds and all that. So I believe wherever they go, even if it isn't the SEC, they will bring Oklahoma State along with them. Now, this would make the SEC a very strong football conference. You'd have multiple teams, probably 5 or 6 teams that are always within the top 15 college football teams in that conference. And especially with them adding a team on the East and 2 teams from the West, they would have to reorganize the conference if they want to keep those rivalries going and also be able to make it work geographically. That's one problem that they currently have with that Missouri team. They're in the SEC East, even though they're the farthest team on the west of the conference. Moving on to the ACC, they currently also have 14 teams, but with them losing Virginia and Virginia Tech in my scenario, they'd be down to 12. Again, they'll be looking to add 4 teams at that point so that they can get up to that 16 number when they do expand again. So the 4 teams I think they will add will be Notre Dame, West Virginia, Cincinnati, and then for the 4th one, it could be between UConn, Temple, maybe at that point if Liberty is good. There's not many teams on the ACC's coast, on the East Coast, that are good football schools that also have huge fan bases that aren't already in a major conference that would want to leave to join the ACC. So that's why that 4th team is kind of up in the air, with UConn being one of the bigger ones, even though they did just announce this past summer that they are going to leave the American to go independent. So now my reasons. Notre Dame, they have been independent for their entire existence, but as of right now, they are currently in the ACC in all other sports, not including football. And in football, they are a 5/8 member, with them having a contract agreement where they play 5 ACC teams a year. So this just kind of works because of what kind of contract they already have in place. I personally would love to see Notre Dame join the Big Ten, but I don't see it happening, as the Big Ten is all about equal revenue sharing, and Notre Dame, with their NBC contract, would not want to lose that because it gets them a lot of money yearly, and so that's why I don't think they'd go to the Big Ten. The ACC, they have been hurting, and so I believe they would allow Notre Dame to come into the conference and also keep that TV deal so that they can add them into their packages whenever they're going to get themselves a new TV deal for the ACC, even though they just started the ACC network. So adding a team like Notre Dame with all that history and all that success would allow them to get more money for the rest of the teams in their conference. Now for West Virginia, this just makes sense from a geographical standpoint. They're the farthest team east in the Big 12, and they shouldn't, and I don't think want to be traveling that far for all of their games anymore. And so I think joining the ACC works out perfectly with where the ACC is on the East Coast. They're a lot closer to a lot more teams. The only problem is that the ACC conference does have very high academic standards with a lot of their schools, and West Virginia is not known for being a strong academic school. I've heard that has been a problem in the past with them joining, even though they're right there in that geographical footprint. So how that would play out, I'm not sure, but I do believe in the end it would add another school with a big fan base who's also competitive in football, so it can only help the ACC when it goes looking for a new TV contract. Now for Cincinnati, they are a little bit farther west and north than a few of the schools in the ACC, but they do add a new state to the mix so that the ACC can expand into a new market. It'd also be right in the heart of Big Ten country, so they'd be able to get some viewers from there. It's also one of the few very competitive group of 5 teams that is in the ACC's area of expansion. And so I believe this just makes sense, again, for another geographic reason as well as being competitive and adding a new market. Now looking out to the West and at the Pac-12, they currently have 12 teams and would be looking at adding 4 teams so that they can get to that magic number 16. The first team I think they would look at adding would be Boise State. It's in Idaho, it's right there in Pac-12 country, and they've been a very strong group of 5 team the past 20 or so years. I think it would make sense for them to join. It adds a new market for the Pac-12. However, the Pac-12 does also have very high academic standards with schools like Stanford, USC, UCLA, Cal Berkeley. And so that is a problem that I've heard, that Boise State does not have the greatest academics when it comes to comparison of all those other schools. But I think they could be added to that conference just because they are a strong team and could add a new market. Next team I think they would look at adding would be BYU. Again, it's right there in Utah. They already got one school in Utah, so this would bring back a really good rivalry between BYU and Utah, as well as adds another market. BYU has a huge fan base all across the United States. They currently are independent, and there is problems with them joining a conference because I've heard they don't want to have games be played on Sundays in any sports, and they want that for the whole conference, and so that could be an issue. But I feel like when it all is said and done, something will be resolved, and they'll also be able to be added to the conference. Another team they would add could be San Diego State. Right there in the San Diego, California, they currently lost the San Diego Chargers that are now moving to the LA, so that market is up for grabs. They only have the Padres there to really compete with, and so they could look at adding them. They've also been a very strong group of 5 team, and they also add good sports in baseball and basketball and other facets than just football. Now for the last team, I think they could add, this will come as a shock to some people, but I think it could be the University of Texas. Now, yes, this would be the farthest east school. It's also Texas, who they run the Big 12 conference along with Oklahoma. They'd be the most profitable team in that entire conference. But in this scenario, where I believe the college football playoff will expand and there's not going to be a lot of independent teams, I think Texas would want to join the Pac-12 instead of staying in the Big 12. For this reason, they do have the Longhorn Network, so that has been a problem with other schools, staying in the Big 12, but also another conference taking on Texas. I think the Pac-12 is really hurting right now in profits, and so I think this would be the same thing as the ACC. Now, ACC letting Notre Dame keep their NBC deal. I think the Pac-12 would let Texas keep their Longhorn network, keep the profits from that, just so that they can add them into the conference and also add them, to a potential TV package deal. Now, why would Texas join the Pac-12? You'll see here in a second when I talk about the Big 12 and what I think is going to happen with that. But essentially, I don't think the Big 12 will still remain a Power 5 conference. And so the Texas will need to jump into another big conference that allows maybe an automatic qualifier or a direct line into that college football playoff. Because then again, that's what it's all about, and all about being competitive in football and making more money through that way. So now on to the Big 12. They currently have 10 teams, but in this scenario, they would be losing Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, and West Virginia. So they'd be down to 6 teams, with those being Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, Texas Tech, TCU, and Baylor. I don't believe they would look at adding 10 more teams so that they could get to that coveted 16-team conference like all the other ones, but I do believe they will add potentially another 6 more to get to the 12 and allow it to match up to the conference's name, the Big 12. Those 6 teams in this scenario would be Memphis, Houston, UCF, USF, and then 2 more teams, which are kind of a wild card, but these 2 make sense for geographic standpoint right now, and also because they are 2 of the more competitive teams in a Group of 5 conference. It'd be Tulsa and SMU. Now, I'm not married to that idea of either of those 2 teams. I think it could be 2 other teams, but just for this scenario, I think those 2 would join. Now, a lot of people would be saying that that would not be good for the conference. Why would Iowa State and Baylor, TCU, Kansas State, and Texas Tech want to stay in there when it falls apart? I just think they won't have any choice. I don't see another Power 5, or at this point Power 4 conference, wanting to expand a lot more than 16 teams, because at that point you can only get so much money from a TV contract to where it would dilute the amount of money that a lot of teams are actually getting. Maybe sometime in the future, but I'm not really sure about it during this next phase of conference realignment. Also, looking at those 6 teams, traditionally they are not the strongest 6 teams in football. I know all 6 of them have had great teams at one point in the past, especially with TCU being great these last 10 or so years. Texas Tech has had good years. Baylor's also killing it currently during this season, being undefeated, as well as in basketball. Kansas is a great school. Iowa State always has a good team, and Baylor also has a good team in there. I just think they don't have the biggest fan bases when it comes to football, and football is the most profitable sport, so that is what is going to drive this next phase of realignment. And so I think those 6 will stay together because another conference will not add them, and they won't just want to disperse and go to random conferences. I think they'll stay in that Big 12. So for the teams that they'll be adding, I think Houston matches perfectly with that geographic footprint. It's also a market that they will definitely be able to get into, even though they're kind of already in there with all of their Texas schools. They also have a good fan base that'll definitely grow with being in this new conference. Same thing with Memphis. Now I added UCF and USF, even though they are very far east and in Florida, which Big 12 currently doesn't have a team in. They have been very competitive, especially with UCF these last 3 years, putting up a few undefeated seasons and making a case for being in that college football playoff, even though they are a Group of 5 team. So I think this will just help the conference and also make it more competitive. Again, Tulsa and SMU, they're just right there geographically. They also, adding those teams would add some rivalries with, SMU, TCU, and a few other teams right there in the area. So this would just make sense for the logistics of traveling, especially if you're already adding 2 far teams out in UCF and USF. Now, a lot of people don't think that the Big 12 will fold, but just in this scenario with Oklahoma and Texas both leaving, the 2 biggest moneymakers in that conference, I feel that it'll kind of squash that conference a little bit, and they'll need to kind of really scramble to add teams there so that they are still there. I do believe they would lose their Power 5 status, said with air quotes. I don't know how they would lose a status like that, but for this scenario, if you're adding that many teams, especially that many group of 5 teams, I don't know if they'd be taken very seriously when it comes down to picking the 4 or potentially more playoff teams in the future. So now with all of the conferences looking like they do, in this scenario being 4 Power 4 conferences with 16 teams each, and then the Big 12 only having 12 teams and kind of stepping down into maybe a group of 6 teams, we'll move into why I think those changes do kind of happen ultimately, and that's because of the college football playoff expanding up to 8 teams when that contract does expire in 2026. In this scenario, I believe it would go up to only 8 teams and not more, to say like a 16-team tournament. In the future, I do think it does get to that point, because if you look at all the other NCAA football conferences, Division III has 32 teams, Division II has 28, Division I FCS has 24. So I know they can do it. I know they can expand that high. It's just going to take a very long time for it to get there. But for this next expansion, it will just get up to 8 teams, which I do believe will be good, because the beauty of college football is that it is final. It's finality, because if a team loses once, it really knocks their chances out of getting into a college football playoff. And so that is the beauty of it. I think if you expand up to 8 teams, you'll definitely be getting some teams with probably 2 losses there at like the 7 or 8 spot. But if you were to expand to 16 teams, I'd say probably half of those teams, if not more, would have 2 losses. And that would hurt, I feel like, college football a little bit, but it would make more money for the entire conference, or for all of the teams in there, for all of NCAA. So I think that's why they do eventually get there, but not during this next expansion. So with the playoff expanding to 8 teams, I think it would look like and give the 4 Power 4 conferences an automatic bid. Their champion would make it to automatically into the college football playoff. Now, then it would leave for 4 spots to be determined by the next 4 best teams. Some people are saying, well, the group of 5 teams or the group of 6 teams in this scenario should have an automatic qualifier. But I think if this expansion does happen, it goes up to 8 teams, and the group of 5, I guess the tournament doesn't owe you guys anything. If you were to be a great team like a UCF or another team that goes undefeated, if you're not in the top 8 teams by the time that the playoff selection comes around, then you probably shouldn't be in the playoff in the first place. So yes, I know that's a little harsh, but that's just the way it is. If you're not in one of those bigger conferences, it does hurt you, but that's the way it is. Those teams have the bigger fan bases, they make more money, and so the NCAA wants those bigger teams to be in it. So I think eventually, when the playoff does expand more, it would be easier for a group of 5 teams to make it in, but not during this next expansion. They won't get a for sure spot if they're a conference champion or the best group of 5 team. So in this expanded playoff, there'd be 3 rounds, and the champion who wins it all would have a max games played of 16 games, which is one more than the 15 that currently could be played by a team. So yes, a big complaint is that we're adding a lot of stresses to these college kids. They're having to play more games. It hurts their bodies more and all that. But with the NCAA now allowing players to be paid, hopefully this kind of reduces those complaints. Also, if you look at every other division, you look at the NFL, you look at Division 3, 2, and 1, the FCS in college football, they play a lot more games than the Division 1 athletes currently do. They have expanded playoffs, even though they have close to the same number of regular season games. So it's not a really valid concern to keep saying that. Yes, I know it is hard to play these games, but even if you look at high school, these players are playing about 16, 17 games to make it all the way to their state championship games if they were to make it all the way. So I know that's a complaint, but hopefully that could be kind of fixed with, paying these athletes and hopefully allowing them to profit, and so that they're actually paying for something and not just out there for the enjoyment of fans. So those are my thoughts on college football realignment and college football playoff expansion. Thank you guys for listening. If you have any other theories or, any other questions or concerns about what I did in mine, go ahead and comment below so that I can read them. I definitely love hearing all these theories and thoughts and reading articles on it. And so let me know what you guys think. This is just what I was able to come up when I looked at it and, looked at TV deals, looked at profitability and all that. And so, thanks for listening, and let me know what you guys think.